This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
We are live. We're down the rabbit hole, and welcome our co-host today, Mr. has ditched us and left us alone.
That he has. That he has.
We're going to talk about Qigong and some practical Qigong. Both me and Zach are very experienced in Qigong. Zach is a formerly accredited Masters of Medical Qigong in Canada, which is
Yes.
There's only 5 people. Isn't it 5?
It's 5, and there's only like 2 in Ontario, and I'm one of them now.
Right.
Only 3, but one of the 3.
I've myself been doing Qigong for many, many years. I consider myself a talented hack. And those of you who are in the shapeshifting class or have read parts of it know that, as Zach has, that I tend to be a very talented hack, as in very put pieces together that should be put together. And so today we're going to talk about Qigong and crisis and different styles of major schools of thought in Qigong, and how there's generally a divide in Qigong between martial Qigong and Qigong. And we have certainly a bias towards one of those. And I think both of us have a bias towards one of those. So with that, Zach, why don't you tell us the difference? Because you've studied the history, and these different schools fall into one of these 2 different styles.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it comes down to there are civilian Qigongs. I'll call them civilian because they were made for peaceful times. And then there was the Qigongs that are meant for war times or in civil war. I've talked about this in classes I've done, but there is a distinct difference because the civilian Qigongs are all about more or less looking good and mostly focused on diet, whereas your war Qigongs are how much vitality can you pull into your life so then you can move forward despite the obstacles.
And interesting enough, like from my point of view, up until this weekend, not being in the war, we can leave that discussion there as to what's going on right now. The fact is that these martial Qigongs, these war Qigongs, from a practical magical standpoint, are much, much more powerful in developing your ability to support magical work than what I found from the Qigongs that are more cosmetic or feeling good Qigongs, as opposed to this core, get your body up to speed as fast as possible.
Mm-hmm. And it's like, there's some ones where they'll even, I don't want to say put fool's traps into them, but it's like, there's a common one that everyone knows about, but no one really like breaks down the nitty gritty. I know we have, but microcosmic orbit, right? That is actually the first Qigong ever. And that was built in a civil war. That was like in the Warring States era in China, when you have thousands, well, I shouldn't say thousands, but at least like hundreds of different like factions breaking into like, how do we move forward? This is the time when Confucianism pops in. This is a time when Taoism starts to flourish. So when you get a Qigong like that coming in, you got to stop and think for a second, like, well, what does this actually imply?
Right. It implies something different than what most people think about Qigong, I think. I mean, for the most part, everyone thinks about Qigong in this go with the flow sort of way. But literally, the microcosmic orbit is a yang technique in its original form. It is completely a masculine and projective technique that builds up your body in a quick fashion, and builds up your health in a quick fashion, but it does through yang techniques. And then basically that improves your projective ability. If everything is chaotic around you, your ability to control and influence reality around you determines mostly on your ability to have a single focus point and to project through that point, as in.
Absolutely. And I mean, I even go into like the social economical standards of that. It's like who actually has the time to do Qigong techniques back in the day? Probably the aristocrats and priest class in China. So you're talking about like a particular class of social economics and those aristocrats doing this type of point of projection magic. Now, why would that be important? Well, if people are working on the ground, how much psychic power and how much energy you can force into getting something to happen makes a big difference in a civil war.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's a very interesting point. We've talked about this class difference in magic from a Western point of view, and we've kind of went down that path at multiple shows on Deeper Down. We never really talk about the class difference, even how Qigong started, and potentially stuff like the microcosmic orbit could still be very based around a class difference. Like, and actually we kind of see this too.
Mm-hmm.
Are doing like through the Wu Zhen Wellness Center, we do Qigong coaching where we help people match the Qigong to their life, right?
Yep.
For that to even work, it requires a certain level of privilege where they have enough time that it's possible. It's time and energy. Like if you're working 3 jobs, it gets really hard to tell people, well, I'll just do the microcosmic orbit for 30 minutes and, this will get better.
Yeah, definitely. And I even go so far as saying it's not just time as a privilege piece, but even mental energy. Like, back in the day, it was like physical energy. Like, were you working the fields? You were a scholar or aristocrat if you had this privilege. So the finances were there, and physically, you didn't have to do much. And that makes a big difference when we're talking about physical vitality, when you want to develop more energy to then project, because that does take a toll on the body. I don't care.
Yeah, I mean, that's a myth of magic that the magician is, godlike, powerful. But in actuality, like magic, I mean, even Western ceremonial magic, even though it's supposedly there's no energy involved, if it's done right, it really does. It doesn't necessarily take a toll on your body, but it's very difficult to do if you're hungry, if you're tired, if you're just a lot of the type of things that, when even now and with the situation being chaotic and in some places, obviously, like, I live in Cleveland, this is quite horrifyingly scary. All of that negative energy, and energy is even in Qigong, I think it's not the best word anymore. It's the common word, but even all that negative information around us and all the information, all the negative vibes around us, like that actually does affect the Qigong. Like you can, if you're doing the Qigong and you're focusing on that stuff, that's a problem. Like a lot of the times people who are doing this with straight methods, I feel like, they're actually somewhat protected in that they don't worry about their own safety, right? So they're starting from just do the form and focus on the microcosmic orbit. It's not like, well, you actually have to be able to get enough focus to be able to do this exercise despite chaotic situations. This is going to take longer, a little more time before you see any results.
Well, right. And then if we go back to, like, we talked about time as a privilege, but space also. I know we've talked about this in previous shows, but who owned land back in the day? It was the aristocrats. So they had a forest to go to. They had plots of land they could just chill in the mountains. Now you hear this particularly in Taoist stuff quite a bit, where they're like, oh, you want to do Qigong in nature. Well, nature wasn't always accessible to you back in the day, especially if you're in the city, which they did have back in China times. I mean, I shouldn't say China times, but at least more ancient Chinese standards of the dynasties. So this is where we look at that and say, like, all right, how do we look at that environment piece? And this is when you get that kick in from feng shui, which, you know, when it's literally back to back on that, where they're like, okay, we have the house. If it's garbage all over the place, that's probably a bad chi. So how's that going to affect you when you're pulling that into yourself, considering the old variant of Qigong not just being Qi work, but Daoyin being the guiding of the, you know, guiding the energy or guiding the Dao through your body? How's that going to affect you if you have garbage around you?
This is actually a more controversial point. I think, you know, there's too much of a narrative in public Qigong that we can get access to. I mean, not the stuff that we're working on, obviously, that consider this, but a lot of it, basically, that's against the narrative. That's against the story they're telling about the Qigong, that it just works the same. Like, you know, I've paid thousands of dollars to learn from Qigong masters who say, my techniques work despite the environment. I never saw that that was true. As being an experienced magician, like, the environment matters a lot. It changes the quality of the Qigong going in, the quality of your mental state. It changes the quality of how much you can compress and how much you want to compress. I mean, sure, if you're in a totally negative environment, there's certain sects, although it's arguably, it is less Chinese, and they tend to be Qigongs that sort of originate from Hinduism more, that you are compressing negative energies and that becomes a positive. But those techniques take longer, and the body alchemy is a little bit slower. The spiritual alchemy might be a little faster, but it still takes time to do that. The level, if you just are sick and you want to feel better, the environmental constraints and the environmental ick, as it were, that's a descriptive word, right, Zach? Ick. I mean, but the environmental ick actually makes a huge difference. Like, so if you're in a house that, you know, you're not comfortable with, you know, or you're in conflict with, sure, your body can, through techniques of continuously compressing that yang into your system, sure, your body can purify that. It does do that because the energy, it's like, from a chi point of view, the energy gets compressed and compressed and compressed and compressed. And what happens is, more or less, it puts that to the similar idea of putting it to fire. It's super yang compression. It's super yang kind of forces the chi to be super condensed. It's not quite fire, but it is basically fire in a way.
Well, yes, it absolutely is. And I mean, we go right back to correspondences. I mean, fire is projective in Chinese culture. Water is a receptive one. So at that point, we look at that. It's like, and this gets into like things that we actually have discussed in the past, where it's like, well, there's different types of microcosmic orbit, and the one that probably is the most common being that fire process is great for vitality. But then we have the other one where it's water and totally receptive.
They're far less common, though, right? And I don't think we've ever discussed that on the show. There is other microcosmic orbits. I mean, we're just talking about the microcosmic orbit. We should give, actually, before going any further, describe what that is. So, because we kind of mentioned it 3 times,
Sure.
Right? I mean, not everyone will know what that is. They might, but I mean, essentially, the microcosmic orbit starts from the lower dantian, and basically, you mentally follow a path around the energy channel, around the underside of your body. It's inside your body, but it's close to the underside, right up the tailbone, from where the hips and the tailbones kind of connect. It goes up the back, and then up around the top of the neck, up around to the top, down the roof of the mouth and the tongue, and down through the throat, and kind of the front bones, and down back to the lower dantian, which is actually 3 finger lengths below your belly button, and 3 or so finger widths inside. That's a rough 30-second summary of the microcosmic orbit.
Right. And for people listening on the audio side of things, this is all down the midline of the front of the body here. So you're matching the spine.
Right. So this it's going up the spine and down the front midline of the body. I almost picture it like down the bone in the chest plate. That's the way I kind of usually think about it.
Right.
And then there's an invisible kind of line where your stomach muscles kind of hold up your spine. That's probably the other side.
Yeah, from energetic standards. So, I mean, this is where, if we rein it back into the environment, if you're doing projective work, absolutely, you can burn whatever you want. It may not be the most effective burn for people that actually have, made fires. There's better things to burn than other things, right? Like you're not going to burn pine, it's going to smoke up. You want something dry. So you can go through a process and kind of burn through things. But ultimately, you rather have a good starting place, right? I mean, why do more work than you need to?
Well, this is also kind of interesting too, because one of the things about Qigong is that, like, when you take the fully, I don't want to say Westernized Qigong, it's very much like Kumbaya Qigong, right?
Yep, it totally kumbaya qigong. That's
But really, when you actually read the Taoist, as much Taoist stuff as we can get, which is not that much, is there's very much a process in Qigong that's very much like ceremonial magic that often gets ignored, which is this idea of the Shen with an idea, creating it, and then you have the Qi, and you're sort of through the process of building yourself up, you can project into that idea more, which then pulls it down into reality, which then may manifest it. That's no one ever talks about that, but it's like even health follows this process. Like, okay, at first you have an idea of getting healthy, and then you're doing the idea and you're doing the Qigong in service of that idea to build up your body, and then it happens. Like it happens through this mechanism of, the Chinese energy channels and them clearing and you building up strength in all those channels. But essentially the idea is this is still following the story of the Tao of nothing because something becomes many things becomes something. And it's how ideas with Qigong actually get into practice. It's much more aligned with classical Hermetic magic than what people think in the West or in the kind of kumbaya circles. Like these ideas, the reason people are doing Qigong all the time isn't just for health. I mean, that's the common thing, but it's also because it allows them to interact with the world in a more poignant, focused manner where they're projecting their will into the world despite distractions, which is completely Hermeticism in a way.
right. And then you get different philosophical slices on that, being like, okay, are we talking about the Confucian one? You're in society and you're interacting in society. Taoism, it's a hit or miss, right? It's like maybe, maybe not. That's your choice. Buddhism's more toward more what we call enlightenment, but what the hell is enlightenment at that point from a Buddhist standard, right? That would be helping people with suffering, right? That's the Bodhisattva vow there. So even on those dynamics, right from the get-go, you're talking about having an environment that suits your needs more than rather than you adapting to the environment, which is something that is a very kumbaya story that we see in the West.
Oh yeah, I mean, this goes along with the meditation. The original purpose of meditation was to become a better killer, and people forget that. These martial qigongs, the point of them was actually to be a better killer. I mean, not exactly killer. In some cases, just to be better able to survive. But they're coming out of war-torn times, and they affect the body to boost up the body in ways that make you much more effective despite external realities. I mean, go ahead, Zach.
Yeah, I mean, on that point, it's like we've talked about microcosmic orbit. That's a very common one. That was, we'll say that's the first ever Qigong supposedly written down in history. What's the next Civil War Qigong? It works directly with your organs. Now, we call this 5 yin organ exercises, very common medical Qigong side techniques. But when you look at it, it was actually because you didn't have an altar, supposedly, and you want the spirits inside of you to protect you. Like that gets kind of screwed up when you think about it, because the joke I have with anyone that learns from me, it's kind of like, okay, everyone has all these like altars and stuff, and you were the impromptu ninja that says, okay, screw it, I know you guys are trying to screw around with me, hi, I'm in the building, and let's just screw this ritual right now.
Yeah, by the way, there was tons of that kind of stuff in the shapeshifting class, which
Yes, it was.
was like even more advanced stuff. And the thing is that even the common, I think the most common one that we're going to base our personal book on is the AK Brocade, is also a military,
Right.
military Qigong. Again, uh, based around getting soldiers energetically, mentally, physically well enough to fight.
Yeah, and I mean, this was in reference to, military operations of you have a ragtag army of peasants. How do you get them to move forward and become like basically elite units as quickly as possible?
That is the purpose of
Idea around it.
right. Yeah, that was the original purpose of the AK Brocade. And when you think about it, like this situation isn't too different from our personal lives at this point. We, I don't know how many of you feel, but things. I mean, before the weekend, I would have been like, yeah, COVID is still people are being crazy with COVID, but now that I'm in a city that literally isn't under curfew and martial law, I'm like, you know, what exactly is our external universes look like right now?
Mm.
You could say, well, it's all, well, you could just perceive that differently, but there's tangible anxiety that is going on where you have to actually be able to project through that. I mean, or you have to be able to use the anxiety, which is also part of Qigong, but no one would actually talk about that.
Right, and this is where Jeffrey wanted me to mention this. Like he's trained under me, and he's done like I taught him my condensed breathing technique, pulling from the sun, right? Because that's the type of stuff we do in the Qigong classes in Toronto, right? So he literally was pulling from the sun, and his circuits over fried, and he was like, "Dude," I'm like, "Yeah, what did you expect? You're pulling the most pure yang substance from a Chinese standard." Aside from pure creation, like that's the next step. That's the number 2 point of yang energy, and it definitely got a quick result. It went good for a little bit, and then he went a little bit overboard, and then we gave him a compensation exercise.
Yeah, you have to actually build your system up to handle that level of yang energies.
Yeah, and this is where my general take, Andrea's take is, well, if you didn't push it far enough to fix yourself, you're probably not pushing it enough, right? So we don't want to blow up. You want safeties on that, but him blowing it up, I was like, okay, good job. We can compensate this now because you know your limit.
I mean, if you blow everything up with Qigong, I mean, it's like blowing yourself up with ritual magic. Although people put Qigong in the safe magic box because they think I mean, literally, you had someone come to your clinic when we're just starting to advertise for Toronto Occult, and they're like, "Oh, you guys do Qigong and Hindu stuff. Well, you sounds like New Age bullshit." I'm like,
Oh,
really? Let me introduce you to Lord Shiva, and you could tell me about New Age bullshit, right? But Qigong is very similar. I mean, everyone thinks it's New Age bullshit, but really, like I think of it more like magical weightlifting.
oh, it's totally magical weightlifting, and it's like we have tools to help you, like acupuncture. It's one of those things that they talk about in classical Chinese medicine, traditional Chinese medicine. The original history of acupuncture that no one wants to discuss, it was meant for exorcisms. So if you're pairing that up with Qigong, you're like, oh yeah, this makes a lot of sense now, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, even this is the thing, like here we have this idea of Qigong. And by the way, the book we're working on will not have this idea that somehow your physical health is separated from the magical ability that you could do, or the things you could do, magically speaking, from the health improvement. This is a uniquely communist. It's coming from the communist change in China. It is definitely not in the original text in China.
Absolutely. And this is where you look at that, like, we had that 1950s switch. And I mean, you look at Cultural Revolution, this is just history now. What happened? Biomedicine was the big thing, and anything with the purge that happened in China, anything traditional was basically ousted. And then they looked at it and said, well, we don't have enough money to buy Western medicine. So what do we have in our culture? Well, we got Qigong. So that's where you see this health focus really kick in. But when you go to other countries that didn't have the purge, like Hong Kong, Taiwan, even like where immigrants went to in Europe, Canada, America, there's this hidden point where we're not going to say exactly what we're going to mean. You just got to pick it up. And there's a reason for that secrecy. It goes back to understanding that there's way more to it, but they don't want to offend cultural norms. And that is a thing that no one actually understands if they're not Chinese. There's a civilian point where we don't want to offend people. So if we start talking about screwed up stuff, that's not good because it offends them from a cultural standard.
Right. And then like what happens is like, you know, you have, I don't want to say non-magicians, but non-spiritual people doing the Qigong and selling the Qigongs now as purely physical. And it's clear, you know, that is a dead end. Like, I mean, it's a dead end because there's limits to how far you can go. Once you get the body up to speed, there's a lot more things that open. While the pathway doesn't look exactly like the chakras, the chakra system or Western magic, it's clear you can go to some of the same places, although depending on which philosophical and even military or cosmetic Qigong really oftentimes just makes people feel good. It doesn't have quite the transformational effects, but some of these militaristic Qigongs are directly, I feel like from practicing a lot of them, they directly relate to spiritual interactions. Like you described the ninja method of binding spirits to your body, which, you know, that's definitely taboo in Western magic.
Yeah.
And definitely taboo in Qigong circles now, even though we both agree the original texts are very quite clear. This is what they were doing. In no uncertain terms, this is what people were doing. And they were utilizing the Qi flow to make sure that those spirits were correctly bound to their organs. And not even bound, more like that's the wrong term.
Working relationship, that's what it was. But there were terms that were met. So it's kind of like we see this in medical Qigong where they say, okay, personify whatever correspondence to, like you have a dragon for representing the earth. You have maybe a red phoenix representing fire. Well, is that a sigil? Sigils for people just listening, it's kind of like an idea that you program, or is that an actual spirit that you pull from the direction? Well, that depends on you now. But the original purpose was you were pulling the directions into you. So you were the universe, literally.
Or even more, it's probably both, right? If you remember all our discussions with various Peruvian shamans, not just Jim, right? What is that about? Well, in the first place, you have a core issue, right? So this is very similar. Like we're seeing this, discussing this core shamanistic idea, like across multiple cultures. Now this is Peruvian to Chinese or to Eastern, Chinese, but I mean, you have an idea where basically in Peruvian shamanism is you take a weak thing, bind it to a stone, and then keep working with the spirit till that weak part of you becomes so aligned with the spirit that it is the spirit.
Well, right. And in that context for medicine, we see that it's like, okay, you may have a predisposition to a weak organ, given a lifestyle choice and or genetics. Why wouldn't you just keep working with it if it's you?
Right. I mean, this is getting more into hardcore alchemy. Like that, I mean, I see this in some books, but not many. Like the idea of this hardcore alchemy also is why when Jeff did the Sun Qigong, we'll call it Sun Qigong, how about that? It basically ripped his system apart. But that's like what happens when you lift weights. Like this is the thing that's missing, I think, from a lot of the Qigong practices. Of what happens when you actually lift weights?
Well, also literally.
You tear your muscles literally. You keep tearing your muscles literally. The whole point is to tear your muscles just enough that you can go back in a few days and tear them again, or a couple days and tear them again. You know, so your system is strained, but it's not necessarily broken. You know, what is the point when you do Qigong? Well, it should be similar, but in a military context, it most certainly would be.
Right. And even from that cosmetic side, I mean, you know, we're saying, okay, peaceful times, we're talking about cosmetics, but that in itself is a civilian war now, because who was the ones doing that most likely? Probably concubines in the imperial court. right? But that's a social war now versus a literal confrontation physically. So we have two different things happening now from strategies.
I think, but I think you don't have a tough time selling me,
Right.
but you'd have a tough time. You might not get hate mail from that alone because of saying they're
Correct.
like Qigong originated from concubines, right? But in a way, you're right. It is a social war where being able to project feeling good and wellness, which we also see as part of our core Western society, projecting an idealized version of happiness and feeling good gets you money.
Mm-hmm.
So we have both the survival problems right now for most of us, and we have the cosmetic Qigong problems of being able to create positive emotions in other people. And you can see that's, you know, like literally if they're originating from that historical point of view, that's literally going to be your most important thing, is to be able to create elicit a state in other people.
Absolutely. And this is where, you know, are you doing receptive work or projective work? Not that passing feelings is not projective, but this is where, again, it gets into which culture you're coming from here. Because remember, Chinese culture is a homogenous culture of various cultures combined, not just one. And that's, again, you have a very solar projective one that did sun worship. You also have one that just did aquatic moon worship and lunar stuff. And then those two cultures combine to have what we have currently, which is the Chinese culture. But when you look at the mythos, it's coming from a culture that just worked with lunar illusions and one that did all solar.
I think you're going to have a tough time saying there's one Chinese culture too.
Correct.
Christian elements in the culture, there's Buddhist elements in the culture, there's, nowadays at least.
But the cultural fabric of things, right? I mean, yes, there's the adaptations of each ethnic group. I know that gets more complicated in Chinese context, but we still have what we call the Han culture, which certain tenets within it.
Well, see, that's why I was making you be more specific.
Yes.
It was the Han culture that you're talking about.
Right. And then you still have those associations when we, you know, going back to microcosmic orbit, going back to that organ exercise. You see that a lot in Western China in particular, where they have no shame about doing this organ exercise where they're like, yeah, screw it. But they are very shamanic in their culture still, of that part of China. And that did not get sanitized from a communist perspective or a Confucian perspective.
Right. I think here you have the Qigongs being sanitized both in the scientific perspective and the cosmetic perspective. Like, I think usually when I'm saying, usually when I see the Qigongs presented, it is definitely sanitized both on it doesn't lead to these kinds of spiritual places, and second, that you can feel good.
Mm-hmm.
Really, well, I've 3 times in my life used Qigong pretty heavily to get out of major illnesses.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've seen you do that, and I've used Qigong to get out of rough patches in my life. Like, you know, I joke around, but it's actually like I'm quite serious when I tell people this. I'm like, if shit hits the fan, I mean, yes, I could do spirit work. Yes, I could do all these things. I usually go back to Qigong first in the roughest patches.
You never know which way spirits are going to turn, right?
Correct.
With Qigong, it's a thought that you're building energy and you project the idea onto the universe. And you have a lot more control over that if you're really uncertain about what the situations are, even with the spiritual world.
Mm-hmm.
If things are that chaotic, you should honestly be a little bit, I want to say, healthy scientific doubt about maybe if there's a storm in the physical world, there's one in the spiritual world too. Then again, you know, as you already know, I'm an initiated voodoo priest, and Zach, and voodoo wasn't really born out of social ease either. So,
No, it's not.
so similar ideas, like this is like, and usually like if the chips really down, I'll go back to Giovanna's first thing, you know. In some cases, for me, in my perspective, it in some ways works even better as a baseline foundation than some of the sanitized ceremonial magic. Like, sure, you can boost the names of God, and unless you really integrate a lot of the Qigong principles, it isn't nearly as strong as doing the Qigong by itself. That's been my experience. I don't know what your experience is, Zach.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it literally is the only thing with Qigong you have is yourself. I mean, when the chips are down, you have your body, basically, right? I mean, that's always with you for survival purposes on a basic level. That is the idea that you have a body still, and we can't get away from that unless we get into high technology stuff, right? Which is still, I'm not the best technology dude. You would know more about that, Andrea, but this is where, like, back in the day, you had your body and you can move everywhere. That gave you freedom and mobility. So it wasn't even a piece of like, oh, we're stuck in social classes. We gave you the piece of you can move around literally because your body can move around. That's a physical metaphor.
Well, I think it also, one of the things too is that the the idea of Qigong only being so limited in that you're operational, like, well, you can heal this stuff, and that's about the end of it. That's just garbage. You can certainly super accelerate not just healing, but actually body functioning. But it's not just body functioning, it's mind functioning, emotional functioning. This is just like when you start getting to higher levels of Qigong, you're able to force different parts of you to operate possibly at a meta level or superhuman level, not quite like stupid Marvel superhuman level, but probably optimal human.
Right. And I mean, we get pretty specific on that. Again, it depends on the philosophy in Qigong because that's a lot of different schools of thought. But if we go back to the organs, it's like, okay, well, we could break up your aspects. We would say, like, you have different aspects of the soul. We've literally put like emotional, mental, and spiritual component to your physical organ, and we combine all of it. So with that, it's like, well, which point are you working on? If we're working with a Po, which is this atavistic primal urge to survive, that's all about breathing. And that's all about your sensitivity with, again, the skin. So can you feel the environmental changes like Spider-Man? Well, I've done that type of work. And with that piece with martial artists, it's like, how do they know when shit's kind of screwed up ahead of time? They kind of have this peripheral sensory built in over training to feel the environment and those temperature changes.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Like, martial artists will tend to focus on that, right? But that certainly isn't the only. Even with the organs, certainly not the only. I don't want to say spiritual power because that just sounds bad, but it's certainly not the only spiritual ability you could develop through the organs alone. I mean, we're not even talking about the AK brocade or anything like that.
Yeah.
But this is only one the danger sense like that comes, and then you'll see that in Tai Chi all the time. Really advanced Tai Chi people, it doesn't look like body mechanics.
No, it doesn't.
They'll say it's body mechanics because that's, again, the sanitization, but it doesn't look that way to me, and it doesn't look that way to Zach, and it doesn't look that way to Western ceremonial magicians who practice. It doesn't look like the body mechanics are there, but it doesn't look like it's just body mechanics, as in they're picking something up from a sensory perspective outside of their five senses that is probably key based. But that's a bad term too because it's so amorphous, but it's certainly something. And there's like people certainly able to do Qigong to develop what would be classical intuition or psychic powers. Like that, martial Qigong is there, but you don't talk about it that much if you're a martial artist because the whole point is to be able to hit people harder as a martial artist. I mean, that's not the only point. I mean,
right. I mean, but what we see mostly what people focus on is that physical piece much more as a martial artist because it's the most grounded piece. If you start saying spiritual stuff to martial artists, like I talk to a lot of black belts and stuff, they're going to be like, well, prove it to me. Let me see this as an actual piece. They're like, they put a good standard up there, right? Again, it's like, if you're going to say you can do it, prove it to me that you can. And I think that's like, it's the same standard you would take to any magical operation or practice. It's going back to this groundedness of saying like, okay, I got a formula supposedly, and I'm just going to keep testing it out. And if it works, great. Now I can inquire and see if we can replicate it.
Although on the flip side of that, a lot of those people are coming from the Randa challenge type of mentality of like, they could get reasonable evidence and still not think it was reasonable evidence.
Right. And
you were more, when we first met, I don't even know how many years ago, you were more skeptical, but in a actual agnostic way. And then you're like, yeah, that was real. But you're just denying any kind of, if you're expecting someone to open a door and a spiritual entity to walk out and hit you aside the head and throw you across the room, that's a pretty high standard to meet. And when it does happen, like, if you're not already an experienced magician, you're probably going to die right there, honestly. You won't be able to tell the story again.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of expectation, like, well, I throw a punch, it generally hits. But there are techniques that you could study, like dim mak and stuff like that, that definitely, there's certain things where you could say dim mak is just pressure points. That's certainly an argument. And there's other stories about the dim mak where you literally hit somebody and it doesn't actually, the person doesn't die right then.
Right. I mean, they've timed this statistically. I've actually seen reports on this because, I dive into the medical hospital shit. And they're like, yeah, if I want this person dead in a few days, that's when you actually want to do that. So you can walk away from it and there's nothing there legally keeping you on par.
Right, but that isn't just a pressure point thing, or it doesn't seem to be, right?
It is a systematic breakdown of the energy on a time basis. That means there's a lot of intention there, actually.
It is, yeah, there's a lot of intention. I'm like, the people who teach the dim mak just as pressure points do not match the stories of what that actually should do. By the way, if people are listening, dim mak is the death touch. So we're talking about death reiki, I guess, like for the people in joke with Jason.
Of course, Jason's not here for that, but we have our Qigong stories with Jason too. So
it's kind of funny. Like the first time Zach came down to my house, we were talking about Qigong, and we're like, yeah, Qigong's awesome, dude. And then Jason, our other co-host, pipes in. He's like, dude, do you got boulders?
And I'm like, boulders? What are you talking about, man? He's like, I saw people do like dragon planes with their dicks. I'm like, dude, what the fuck?
Yeah. Jason, there you go.
Talking about iron crotch Qigong. That's great for a few things. I'd rather not do that.
So yes, Matthew's basically saying vibral palm strikes conditioning usually accompanies dim mak training. Absolutely, because you have to be able to handle that type of energy in your palm without getting sick.
Yes, and I mean, you actually see that in Chinese medical massage. We actually have vibrating palm, and we teach you how to do it. Just no one teaches it from the Qigong dynamics.
Yeah, exactly. That's building up the strength of both the energy channels in your palm. And then, in fact, even lots of healing techniques, even Reiki, builds up the strength of the palm. The energy channels through the palm, so that way it can focus the energy down. I mean, people don't want to talk about healing techniques, and hurting techniques are usually the same, but
they absolutely are. Right. And this is where, I mean, in our upcoming book, I mean, for people that are kind of popping in just now, I mean, we are going to be writing a book, Andrea and I. And with that, for the sponsors, you guys are going to be getting those goodies as we write the copy slowly with it.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about that in the second half of the show, which is at 9 o'clock. Which, by the way, Zach, you should put in the chat the sponsor link. So today we're talking about Qigong. We're going to do some practical Qigong exercises in the sponsor only part of the show, and we're going to do a evocation of the Monkey King, invite the Monkey King to make his presence known, as the Monkey King is helping us to be our narrator of the book.
He is the narrator, and he was technically a Qigong master when you look at what he did.
Correct. So there we go. So some simple things that, to kind of get into it a little bit more, some simple things you could do right now is we've covered this a couple times, but we'll walk through a lower Dantian meditation. We run this meditation every day, the Wu Zhijian clinic. Every day we run the same meditation because it really is a simple meditation that really focuses you on your center. And at that point, it's mostly neither yin nor yang. It's kind of in between, but it can be taken in either direction, just to kind of center you. It's not quite receptive either. You're not trying to actually pull things in. But if you do this exercise just straight in the sun, it will become yang. If you do the exercise just sitting in the water, like a swimming pool or bathtub, well, you can't really do it sitting in a bathtub because it's mostly a standing exercise or a sitting exercise. But you could sit in the bathtub and do it. It'll become more yin. So
Right.
it's more receptive depending on which environment that you're actually doing or which environment you're meditating, you're envisioning around the technique. So I usually do this in the sun or envision the sun. And as Zach is very well knows, like I've basically conditioned myself so far in solar energies that I could practically be on fire in the sun, spiritually speaking, and it's not going to really hurt me.
Yeah.
Years of practice. What?
Yes, I've totally seen how much solar energy you can pull in, and I'm like, it feels like thousands of suns in front of me, and it's a vacation, and all this other glories of the sun. I'm like, damn.
Exactly. But that's the way I would envision it. If you are having anxiety issues, don't do that. It would probably be much better to just kind of focus on being in a cool stream while you're doing it. That'll be calming down. I know there's a lot of Qigong practices that say visualization's bad. For the purposes of what we're going to show you as the end of the show, the visualization's fine because there's going to be the feeling component with the lower Dantian. If you're feeling like not anxiety but despair, use the sun, right? If you're feeling like overwhelmed, use the idea of a cool stream, maybe cool breeze with the stream, both of which are yin type of metaphors. And Zach, why don't you run us through that to kind of capstone the show that we've been doing, the free part of the show?
Sure. So everyone, I'd like you to take, look at your hand. You have your index finger all the way to your pinky. We're going to take that with those 4 fingers, put it directly underneath your belly button, bring both feet on the ground if you're sitting, right? And with that, quid pro quo, don't be doing this while you're driving or, anything motorary standard. Like we expect you to be able to just chill out while you're listening to this particular meditation. So 4 fingers directly underneath the belly button. You're going to feel where you physically are having the pinky fall. That is where your center of gravity is anatomically. Now, the energetic Dantian is just behind that. So we're going to have you imagine a line going from where your pinky is down straight back toward your spine to the tailbone. And with that, you're going to find a particular area in your pelvis or abdomen, and it's going to be on that line from the pinky to the spine about 1 to 2 inches in. It may be slightly right, may be slightly left, or just a little further back. Everyone's a little bit different on this because everyone has a unique positioning of their Dantian. So with that, you might have a cool sensation, a warm sensation, a centering sensation, or it could just feel kind of more, the texture is a little bit thicker there. So when you do that, you're just going to breathe in, and it should feel as if your whole body has linked up. Now, when I say linked up, it means you may feel your body relax, your muscles drop, and things in your mind just go quiet very quickly. that's how we generally do the litmus test with the Lower Dantian meditation. Now, I'm going to hand it over to Andrea for projecting that further to the environment piece.
So it's easy, pretty easy. Once you find your lower dantian, Zach gave a great description of it, and you might have different sensations too. So go ahead and do that right now. You just feel the 4 finger lengths. Feel your mental focus going inward until you find that special spot where it's just different. I'm going to do the solar one real fast because that's what I usually do. And just feel your lower dantian at the same time. Close your eyes and just imagine the sun all around you, just beaming down on you. And it's the perfect temperature day and the perfect temperature sun and the perfect temperature and the perfect amount of light just shining on you. Just keep focusing on your lower dantian though. Now, as you do that, you'll feel your whole body instantly shift more towards that solar yang vibe. All right, you're doing great. Thumbs up, everyone. How you guys feel? How do you feel, Zach?
I feel great. It's like, being in the Caribbean with a martini.
Exactly. Just so you can all feel the difference, which I think is a big part of how we teach Qigong. It was a big part of the shapeshifting class. It's a big part of our whole methodology is teaching. I'm going to show you the opposite one now. It's not really opposite, but the cool water one, so you can understand the difference. And then I'm going to, as soon as we take a break, do the sun one again, so I'm not cold. So in this one, again, just focus on your lower dantian. See, the dogs like the stream. Let's focus on the lower dantian again. Feel that special point as you sink your body in. And you feel that time when you're just connected, right when you hit the right spot, you'll know it. In fact, you know it right now. And now just breathe in and out, focusing on the lower dantian. And as you do that, just imagine your whole body, not enough to drown, in a cool stream. And feel the water at a very comfortable temperature rushing by you. Feel the wind across the stream washing by your head, but keep focusing on your lower dantian at the same time. All right. How you doing, Zach?
Feeling chilly, but relaxed.
Right. So this actually, like if you do that exercise alone, in the context of what we're talking about, actually does lead to some interesting psychic things. Because it does have to tend with the water and yin to be more receptive once you're doing that. If you physically do it in water, that's safe, obviously, like a lake. And the current doesn't, here in Cleveland, like area, kind of buffets you enough that it might be hard. But if it's pretty calm waters, or the stream isn't moving too fast, it can be both physically and spiritually. You can let go of a lot of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
It's also going to make you more receptive, naturally receptive to intuition, to spiritual forces, to all of that.
Right. So, I mean, this is a question of, again, what do you want in your life? We were trying to keep this as an open book with the Qigong exercises, but if you want more like receptivity, you're going to be doing more yin things, more water things. But if you want to do more projective things and say, I don't really want to feel as much, I just want to boom, there's my intention, and it happens, that's more yang, that's going to be more fire and soul-ray.
Exactly. So it's about almost an hour. If you guys have any questions real fast, put it in the chat.
Yeah.
So people staying for the second hour. If you're not a sponsor, we always take a 5 to 15 minute break between deeper down discussion, and then the training technique part of it. So if you join up right now, we're happy to let you stay in, and we're going to actually break off into partners and do some practical exercises to take this further. And the second part of the training today will be a Monkey King introduction, and basically a call to the Monkey King, where he'll help us kind of better our own energy flow in his own special way.
Mm-hmm.
We can talk about that in the second part of the class, about the tailor-made servitors as spirits for the practice. That was basically openly discussed in the shapeshifting course, but the 5 yin yang, we can kind of talk about that for a little bit. In practice, it requires you to be able to circulate chi continuously, because part of what those spirits get is access to your chi. And if it's a natural external spirit, if it's a servitor, it still needs to be fed in this way. So you have to have enough chi to be able to support 5 servitors that go and do stuff, right, based on your chi levels. So if you're not doing enough Qigong, this technique isn't going to work. The servitors will just die. If they're external spirits, they'll just start eating you. That's the thing no one wants to talk about with that technique. That's why they don't talk about the technique. The servitors themselves, to get out of control, will act just like an external spirit. They'll probably eat you or try to eat you to take your energy, because they want to live too. Once they, even though they're constructs, they still have sort of a weirdness, not a weirdness, but a desire to live, I guess, would be the easiest to say.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's not that talked about again. It's just one of those things where they're kind of like, tough luck, figure it out yourself on this one, unfortunately. I mean, you see a few Taoist texts kind of hint at this because they like being experimental. You do see some Buddhist texts talking about it, but generally speaking, they're kind of like, unless you're getting that direct apprenticeship, you're not going to be understanding these nuances around that.
Right. And the key is when you embed the spirits into your body, probably the people who could do that fall into that aristocratic method. Because if you get an injury in one of those organs, you're going to have to doubly work, because an injury kind of starts making the chi leak out, in which case if a servitor that's living there cannot get enough chi, an organ probably won't heal better. Now, if you're in good relations even with a servitor, I mean, it sounds weird to say good relations with the tailor-made servitors, but if you have a good relation, you could actually heal faster, because you'll be pushing more energy in. It's still happening with a price. It's still happening. It's not a price, but there's still an arrangement, even with that type of servitor.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is why you hear the common phrase. It's a very common phrase you hear in martial arts terms. It's like, you miss 1 day of training, it's like 100 days you've gone back. Why? It's because of something like this.
I don't know if that's quite true, but
Well, that's generally the adage of work discipline, right? But from the energetic standards I have heard from, Taoist priests and stuff, that is generally where it goes. Where they're assuming is like, you're not working for a day, there is going to be a cost, and they go 100 because it's a double pun on word plays now in Chinese. Because
it's it's a wordplay, right? Because it's like
of death and white, right? So this is where you miss a day, and that could be a death of you, or it could be a rebirth of you. It goes either way on that one, because white is all the colors. So there you go, peeps. Trying to play for the ending.
double pun. So this is deeper down the rabbit hole. A couple things on the way out. Stay safe, especially if you're in the States. Things getting really weird the last few days. Stay healthy. Some of the simple Qigong exercise that we just covered, even though it's very simple, with the solar energies, does actually tend to boost immune system. That sun exercise done in that way, I don't know what Jeffrey mentioned, exercise with the sun. It probably was more intense than that. But that sun exercise, just letting the beam of light hit you, actually does boost the immune system that we've seen in practice. It's enough, if done for a few minutes a day, that it does boost your immune system a great deal just with that alone. So if you get nothing else, stay safe, stay calm, keep your immune system up. We're still not out of this COVID thing. We hope to see you all. We hope to see you all again, and again, hopefully.